At my 64th birthday, my son told his sister, "Now's the time to take control of her salary." The words sliced through the air like a knife through my heart. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I remember that December evening in my small Queens apartment like it was yesterday. The radiator hissed its familiar tune, and the smell of coffee grounds mixed with the dampness that always clung to my kitchen walls. My hands wrapped around my favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle that I'd refused to throw away for 15 years. It held memories of better times, when my children would visit and complain about the bitter coffee I made, laughing as they added sugar by the spoonful. The wooden floors creaked beneath my feet as I moved through my daily routine. Get up at 6. Make coffee. Check my phone for messages that rarely came. Iron my library uniform. The same navy skirt and white blouse I'd worn for 3 decades, walking the 12 blocks to work because the subway fare had become a luxury I calculated against groceries. My apartment was a shrine to sacrifices made. The couch I'd bought secondhand in 1987 still held the impression of bodies that no longer visited. Photos lined the mantel like sentinels, watching over a woman who had given everything and received so little in return. There was Tommy at graduation, his arm around me, smiling like I was his whole world. Sarah in her wedding dress, clutching my hand like she needed my strength. My husband James, before the city lights started calling him away from home more nights than not. The library had been my sanctuary for over 30 years. Between those tall shelves filled with stories of other people's lives, I found peace. The musty smell of old books, the whispered conversations, the gentle clicking of keyboards. Mrs. Peterson, my supervisor, always said I had the gentlest way with patrons, especially the older ones who came in seeking companionship more than books. I understood their loneliness because I carried it in my bones. 3 days before my birthday, I had sent what felt like the most pathetic text message of my life. Would anyone like to come for dinner on Saturday? It's my birthday. My fingers trembled as I hit send to my children, my 2 grandchildren, even my sister who lived in the Bronx. The silence that followed was deafening. Only my granddaughter Emma responded with a single word, maybe. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, waiting for it to buzz with love that never came. The vanilla candle I'd lit reminded me of my mother's perfume, and for a moment, I could almost feel her presence. She would have been horrified at how my children treated me. "Dorothy," I imagined her saying, "when did you stop demanding the respect you deserve?" My mother had raised me to believe that family came first, always. Even when it hurt. Even when it drained you dry. She used to say, "A mother's love knows no bounds," but sitting in that dim kitchen, surrounded by silence, I wondered if she'd meant that a mother's suffering should also know no bounds. The morning of my birthday arrived gray and cold, typical December weather in Queens. I'd spent the previous evening cooking all their favorite foods, even though only Emma had confirmed she might come. Lasagna for Tommy, who used to devour it as a teenager. Homemade bread for Sarah, who always claimed mine was better than any bakery. Apple pie that took me 3 hours to make from scratch, the way my grandmother had taught me. I set the table for 6, hoping against hope that someone would surprise me. The good china came out of the cabinet where it had been gathering dust for 2 years. I polished each piece until it gleamed, remembering the last family dinner we'd had, how everyone had laughed and told stories. When had that changed? When had I become someone they only called when they needed something? At 4 o'clock, my apartment felt cavernous despite its modest size. The food sat cooling on the stove, and I found myself checking my phone every few minutes. 5 o'clock came and went. At 6, I heard footsteps on the stairs and my heart jumped, but they belonged to Mr. Rodriguez from upstairs. Then, at 7:30, just as I was wrapping up the untouched lasagna, I heard voices in the hallway. My heart hammered as I smoothed my hair and opened the door to find Tommy, Sarah, and my youngest granddaughter Emma standing there with forced smiles and empty hands. "Happy birthday, Mom," Tommy said, giving me a quick hug that felt more like an obligation than affection. Sarah kissed my cheek, her lips barely touching my skin. Emma, sweet Emma, threw her arms around me with genuine warmth, and for a moment, I remembered what real love felt like. We sat around the dining table, and I served the meal I'd spent all day preparing. The conversation felt stilted, artificial. They complimented the food with the same tone people use to discuss the weather. I asked about their jobs, their lives, their children, and received one-word answers or distracted nods. As we moved to the living room for cake, I excused myself to the kitchen to light the candles. That's when I heard Tommy's voice, low and confidential, speaking to Sarah by the window. "Look, she's turning 64. Now's the time to take control of her salary before she does something stupid with it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the counter, the birthday candles scattered across the linoleum floor. My legs felt weak, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there in my own kitchen. She's getting older, and you know how these elderly people are with money, he continued. We need to make sure her finances are protected. Protected. From whom? From me? From my own life, my own choices, my own dignity? Sarah's voice was quieter, but her words carried the same poison. I've been thinking the same thing. She's been acting strange lately, more independent. It's not healthy at her age. Independent. As if wanting to make my own decisions about my own money was a symptom of mental decline rather than basic human dignity. I gathered the scattered candles with shaking hands, my mind reeling. 64 wasn't ancient. I was healthy, sharp, still working full-time. I balanced my own checkbook, paid my own bills, managed my own life. What they were discussing wasn't protection, it was a coup. When I returned to the living room with the cake, Emma was showing her father something on her phone. Grandma painted this in her art class, she was saying proudly. Isn't it beautiful? Tommy barely glanced at the screen. That's nice, honey. As they sang happy birthday, their voices flat and disinterested, I made a wish that would change everything. I wished for the courage to stop being their doormat. I wished for the strength to demand the respect I deserved. I wished for a life where my worth wasn't measured by my willingness to give everything and ask for nothing in return. The cake was store-bought vanilla, not even my favorite flavor. They stayed for exactly 45 minutes, leaving with wrapped plates of food and promises to call soon that I knew they wouldn't keep. Emma hugged me last, whispering, I love you, Grandma, and for a moment, I held on to that warmth like a life preserver in a storm. After they left, I sat in my empty apartment surrounded by dirty dishes and the echo of their betrayal. The words replayed in my mind like a broken record, now's the time to take control of her salary. Not our mom's money. Not our mother's hard-earned income. Her salary, like I was already a stranger to them, an object to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I had given them everything. For decades, I had been their safety net, their emotional support, their financial backup. When Tommy's first marriage fell apart, who paid for his lawyer? When Sarah needed a down payment for her house, who emptied her savings account without question? When the grandchildren needed school clothes or Christmas gifts their parents couldn't afford, who worked overtime at the library to make it happen? The history of my sacrifices played like a movie in my mind. I remembered the night Tommy called, drunk and sobbing, after his business partner stole half their company's assets. I wired him $5,000 at 3 in the morning, money I'd been saving for a small vacation I'd dreamed about for years. I never took that trip. I remembered Sarah's tearful phone call when her husband lost his job. I paid their mortgage for 6 months, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could make sure my grandchildren had a roof over their heads. When her husband found work again, they never offered to pay me back. I never asked. There were smaller sacrifices too, the ones that chipped away at my soul day by day. The birthday dinners I paid for at restaurants they chose, watching them order expensive meals while I stuck to soup and salad. The Christmas presents I bought for everyone while receiving nothing in return, or worse, receiving gifts that made it clear they'd spent 5 minutes and $10 at a gas station. The medical emergency last winter haunted me most of all. Pneumonia had hit me hard, and I'd been bedridden for 2 weeks. I called Tommy first, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained I needed help with groceries, maybe someone to check on me. He said he was busy with work and would try to come by on the weekend. He never came. I called Sarah next, and she listened to my labored breathing with what sounded like impatience. Mom, you know I can't leave the kids right now. Maybe call Emma when she gets out of school. Emma, 17 years old, was the only one who showed up. She brought soup from a deli and sat with me, holding my hand as fever racked my body. A child showed me more love and care than my own children, and the irony wasn't lost on me. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen from across the hall, knocked on my door every day to make sure I was eating. She barely spoke English, and I knew very little Mandarin, but we communicated through smiles and gestures of kindness. She brought me tea and homemade dumplings, refusing to let me pay her back. Family help family, she said in halting English, and I realized she understood family better than my own blood relatives. The pattern had been building for years, so gradually that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. The phone calls that only came when they needed something. The visits that felt more like business transactions than family time. The way they discussed my life and my choices as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with my own decisions. Mom, you don't need that much space, Sarah had said during one visit, eyeing my apartment like a real estate appraiser. You should think about downsizing to something more manageable. Manageable for whom? I loved my apartment. Yes, it was small and old, but it was mine. I'd lived there for 22 years, raised memories in every corner. The thought of giving it up so they could, what? Monitor me more closely? Access whatever equity I'd built up? Tommy had been more direct in his suggestions. You should really consider direct deposit for all your bills, Mom. Let me set up automatic payments for you. It'll be easier. Easier for him to keep track of my spending, I realized now. The checking account he wanted access to, just in case something happened, was the same account that held 30 years of careful savings, Social Security payments, and the small retirement fund I'd managed to accumulate despite decades of supporting everyone else. The stock market investments I'd made over the years had actually done well, something that would surprise my children if they knew. I'd been careful, conservative, working with a financial advisor from a firm in Manhattan that dealt with working-class clients. My portfolio had grown steadily, and between that and my retirement savings, I had built up a modest but respectable nest egg. Nothing extravagant, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be a burden on anyone in my old age. The irony was bitter. They wanted control of money I'd earned through decades of sacrifice, most of it sacrificed for them. I'd foregone vacations, new clothes, restaurant meals, entertainment, anything that might have brought me joy, so that I could be their perpetual safety net. Now they wanted to transform me from a giver into a ward, from a mother into a managed asset. That night, after my disastrous birthday dinner, I sat in the dark staring out my window at the lights of Manhattan. The city sparkled like diamonds against black velvet, but I felt as cold and empty as the December air. In that darkness, surrounded by the echoes of their casual cruelty, a dangerous thought began to form. What if I stopped? What if I stopped answering every call for money? What if I stopped prioritizing their wants over my needs? What if I stopped accepting scraps of affection as if they were full meals? The thought terrified me more than it should have. I'd built my identity around being needed, around being useful. If I wasn't their safety net, their reliable source of emergency funds, their ever-present emotional support system, then who was I? Would they have any reason to stay in contact with me at all? But as I sat there in the dark, I realized they barely stayed in contact with me anyway. The calls came when bank accounts ran low. The visits happened when they needed something I could provide. The affection was metered out in tiny doses, just enough to keep me hoping for more but never enough to actually satisfy the hunger for love that gnawed at me constantly. I thought about Emma's genuine hug and compared it to the perfunctory embraces I'd received from my own children. I thought about Mrs. Chen's daily check-ins during my illness and contrasted it with Tommy and Sarah's convenient unavailability. I was pouring my love, my money, my life into people who saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The winter sun streamed through my kitchen window as I made coffee, and instead of the bitter brew I usually drank to save money, I opened a bag of good coffee beans I'd been saving for special occasions. If my 64th birthday wasn't special enough, what was I waiting for? I called in sick to work, the first mental health day I'd taken in 15 years. Mrs. Peterson was concerned, asking if I needed anything, if someone could cover my shifts for the week. The genuine care in her voice made me want to cry. When was the last time one of my children had asked if I needed anything without following it up with a request for something themselves? I spent that day doing something revolutionary. I thought about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. I made a list of dreams I'd deferred, plans I'd postponed, experiences I'd denied myself in service of being everyone's perpetual giver. The list was heartbreaking in its simplicity. I wanted to take an art class. I wanted to travel somewhere, even if it was just a weekend trip to the Hudson Valley to see the fall leaves. I wanted to buy clothes that made me feel beautiful instead of just serviceable. I wanted to eat at a nice restaurant without calculating the cost of every bite. I wanted to feel like my life belonged to me. But first, I had to stop the bleeding. I had to stop the constant drain of money, energy, and hope that left me perpetually empty while they seemed perpetually satisfied. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't the dramatic scene I'd imagined. It started with a text from Sarah. "Mom, can you help with Emma's car insurance this month? Things are tight." For years, I would have transferred the money before she finished typing. This time, I stared at the message for 5 minutes before typing back, "I can't help with that right now." My phone rang within 30 seconds. "What do you mean you can't help?" Sarah's voice carried that edge of panic I'd heard so many times before. "It's just car insurance, Mom. It's not like I'm asking for a fortune." "I know what it is," I said quietly. "And I'm saying no." The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had shifted into the tone she used with Emma when trying to manipulate her into compliance. "Mom, are you feeling okay? You're acting strange. Maybe you should see a doctor." There it was. The immediate assumption that my saying no was a symptom of illness rather than an expression of autonomy. The quick pivot to making me doubt myself rather than examining their own behavior. "I'm feeling fine," I said. "I'm just not going to keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Being your personal bank." Another long silence, this one thick with anger. "Wow, Mom. Just wow. I asked for help one time and you act like I'm robbing you blind." One time. As if the previous 5 years of constant requests had been erased from both our memories. "Sarah, last month you needed help with groceries." The month before that, it was the electric bill. Before Christmas, it was Emma's school trip money. When exactly was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her scrambling for an answer that wouldn't reveal the truth we both knew. I call you all the time, she said finally, but the words lacked conviction. To talk about what? Another pause. Look, Mom, families help each other. That's what families do. You're right, I said. Families do help each other. But for the past several years, the help has only been flowing in one direction. The call ended with Sarah hanging up on me, but instead of the crushing guilt I expected to feel, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I had stated a simple truth without apologizing for it. Tommy's reaction was more direct and infinitely crueler. He showed up at my apartment the next evening, letting himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago for emergencies. "What the hell is wrong with you?" were the first words out of his mouth. No hello, no concern for my well-being, just anger that his safety net was showing signs of independence. "Nothing's wrong with me," I said, though my heart was hammering. Confrontation had never been my strong suit. I was built for accommodation, for smoothing over rough patches, for making everyone comfortable even if it left me miserable. "Sarah told me about your little tantrum yesterday," he said, pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "What's this about not helping family anymore?" "It's about helping myself for once." He stopped pacing and stared at me as if I'd spoken in tongues. "Help yourself with what?" "You've got everything you need." Everything I needed. A one-bedroom apartment with pipes that groaned in winter and windows that didn't quite close properly. A job that paid the bills but left little for extras. A social life that consisted of work colleagues and a few neighbors because I'd never had the time or money to cultivate friendships. "I don't have everything I need," I said quietly. "Like what?" The question was asked with such genuine bewilderment that I realized he truly didn't understand. In his mind, I was a resource that required only basic maintenance to keep functioning. Food, shelter, purpose through serving others. What else could an elderly mother want? "I need to feel like my children value me for who I am, not what I can give them." His laugh was sharp and humorless. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Of course we value you. When was the last time you called me just to talk?" "I call you all the time. To ask for money." "When was the last time you called to ask how I'm doing, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "We talk every time I call. You talk. You tell me about your problems, your needs, your plans. You never ask about mine." "What plans could you possibly have?" The question was asked without malice, which somehow made it worse. He genuinely couldn't imagine that I might have dreams, desires, aspirations that didn't revolve around serving his family's needs. "That's exactly the problem," I said. He stayed for another hour, alternating between anger and attempts at emotional manipulation. He reminded me of all the times he'd helped me move furniture, as if moving a couch 5 years ago balanced the scales against tens of thousands of dollars in financial support. He told me how much his kids loved their grandmother, as if their love was contingent on my continued financial contributions. When guilt didn't work, he tried fear. "Mom, you're getting older. You're going to need us more and more as time goes on. You don't want to burn bridges." The threat was subtle but clear. Continue being useful or face old age alone. After he left, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The conversation had confirmed my worst fears about how they saw me, but it had also revealed something I hadn't expected. I was stronger than I thought. I had said no and meant it. I had stated my truth without backing down. It felt terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The next few weeks were the loneliest of my life. My phone, which used to ring regularly with requests disguised as conversation, fell silent. No one called to check on me. No one stopped by for unexpected visits. The silence was deafening, but it was also illuminating. Emma was the exception. Sweet Emma continued to text me regularly, sharing little details about her life, asking about my day, sending me photos of things that made her think of me. Her messages were a lifeline during those dark weeks, proof that genuine love could exist without conditions or expectations. "Grandma, are you okay?" she texted one evening. "Mom and Dad seem weird about you lately." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just making some changes in my life." "Good changes?" "I hope so." She sent back a heart emoji and a photo of a sunset she'd taken from her bedroom window. "This reminded me of the sunsets we used to watch from your fire escape," she wrote. Those summer evenings felt like a lifetime ago, when Emma was small enough to curl up in my lap as we watched the sun disappear behind Manhattan's skyline. We'd make up stories about the people in the lit windows across the courtyard, sharing ice cream and dreams with equal enthusiasm. When had those moments become so rare? When had my relationship with my family become purely transactional? The financial freedom I'd reclaimed was intoxicating. Without the constant drain of emergency loans and temporary help that was never repaid, I had money left over each month. Real money, not just enough to cover bills and basic necessities. I opened a separate savings account, one they knew nothing about, and watched it grow week by week. I also made an appointment with a therapist, something I'd considered for years but never prioritized over everyone else's needs. Dr. Martinez worked out of a small office near the library, specializing in family dynamics and life transitions. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who listened without judgment as I poured out decades of resentment, guilt, and confused love. "You're describing a pattern of emotional manipulation," she said after several sessions. "Your children have learned that if they apply the right pressure at the right time, you'll give them what they want. They've also learned that there are no consequences for treating you poorly because you'll always be available when they need something." The words stung because they were true. I had trained them to see me as infinitely available and endlessly giving. I had created the very dynamic that was now causing me so much pain. "But they're my children," I said, the phrase that had justified decades of poor treatment. "Yes, they are. And you're their mother, which means you deserve their love and respect, not their exploitation. What if they stop talking to me altogether?" Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Dorothy, if your relationships with your children can only survive when you're giving them money, then they're not relationships at all. They're transactions." The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I left that session feeling shattered and liberated at the same time. Over the following months, I began to rebuild my life from the ground up. I bought new clothes, not the practical, colorless garments I'd worn for decades, but beautiful things that made me feel like the woman I'd forgotten I could be. I joined a watercolor class at the community center in Flushing, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or money for. The art class was a revelation. Surrounded by people my age who were exploring creativity and embracing new experiences, I remembered what it felt like to do something purely for joy. My first painting was terrible, a muddy landscape that looked more like a photograph left in the rain than anything artistic. But the woman sitting next to me, Rose, a retired nurse from Brooklyn, smiled at it with genuine warmth. "It looks like how I feel some days," she said with a laugh. "Blurry but determined to be beautiful anyway." We became friends over shared struggles with stubborn watercolor techniques and stories about children who expected too much. Rose had gone through her own reckoning with her family 5 years earlier, setting boundaries that had initially caused an uproar but eventually led to healthier relationships. "The first year was hell," she admitted as we cleaned our brushes after class one evening. "But now my kids call because they want to talk to me, not because they want something from me. It's worth it, Dorothy. The peace is worth it." I clung to her words during the difficult months that followed. The holidays were particularly brutal. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation to join anyone's celebration. I spent the day volunteering at a shelter in Manhattan, serving meals to people who thanked me with genuine gratitude. It was more fulfilling than any family dinner I'd endured in recent years. Christmas was harder. Emma called on Christmas morning, her voice thick with tears. "Grandma, I don't understand why you can't just apologize to everyone and make things normal again." "What would I be apologizing for, sweetheart?" For being difficult. For not helping when people need it." The words came out in a rush, clearly rehearsed. Someone had coached her to make this call, to use her relationship with me as leverage to bring me back into line. "Emma, do you think I was wrong to say no when your mother asked for money?" A long pause. "I don't know. Everyone says you were." "What do you think?" Another pause, longer this time. I think maybe you get tired of always giving and never getting anything back." The wisdom in her young voice nearly broke my heart. "What do you mean?" "Like, when I was little, you always came to my school plays and art shows. But when you were in the hospital, nobody came to see you except me. That seems weird, right?" Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had seen what the adults refused to acknowledge, that love should flow in both directions. "I love you, Grandma," she said before ending the call. "I don't care what anyone else says." I held on to those words like precious gems in the dark months that followed. The silence from Tommy and Sarah stretched on through winter and into spring. No Mother's Day call, no birthday acknowledgement when March arrived, no random check-ins or requests for help. The absence of their voices should have devastated me, and in some ways it did. But it also revealed the truth I'd been avoiding: they had never really been present in my life anyway. What I had mistaken for relationship had been routine servitude. What I had called love had been obligation wrapped in guilt and manipulation. The silence hurts, but it was an honest hurt, clean and direct rather than the slow poison of being used by people who claimed to love me. Spring brought changes I hadn't expected. My supervisor at the library, Mrs. Peterson, announced her retirement, and to my surprise, she recommended me for her position. At 64, I had assumed my career advancement days were behind me, but the library board offered me the promotion with enthusiasm. The increase in salary was modest but meaningful, and more importantly, it felt like recognition of my worth as something other than a source of financial support. The new responsibility energized me in ways I hadn't felt in years. I implemented new programs for elderly patrons, started a book club that met weekly, and developed partnerships with local community centers. The library became more than my workplace, it became my domain, a place where people valued my knowledge, experience, and judgment. My social life began to expand beyond the walls of my apartment. Rose introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had all navigated their own struggles with family relationships, financial independence, and late-in-life self-discovery. We met for coffee, took day trips to museums in the city, attended concerts in the park during summer evenings. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a community that existed purely for mutual enjoyment and support. No one needed money from anyone else. No one was keeping score of favors given and received. We simply enjoyed each other's company, shared stories and laughter, and created the kind of family I'd always wished I had been born into. The financial planning I'd begun during my period of rebellion started paying dividends in unexpected ways. My investment portfolio, carefully managed over the years, had grown substantially. The money I'd previously given away each month was now being invested, and my retirement picture looked more secure than I'd ever dared hope. I consulted with a financial advisor about setting up a small trust fund for Emma's college education, something that would be completely separate from her parents' knowledge or control. She was a bright, creative kid who deserved the chance to pursue her dreams without the financial stress that had defined my own early adulthood. The process of creating that trust fund forced me to confront questions about inheritance and legacy. Did I owe Tommy and Sarah anything simply because they were my children? Did years of exploitation negate whatever natural obligation I might have had to leave them financially secure? I thought about my own mother, who had died with very little to leave behind. She had given everything to her children while she was alive, just as I had done. But she had received love and respect in return, regular visits and phone calls that weren't tied to requests for money. The parallel wasn't perfect. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the complex emotions surrounding money, family, and obligation. You have no moral duty to fund their lifestyles, she said during one of our sessions. Your obligation was to raise them, educate them, and prepare them for independent adult lives. You fulfilled that obligation and more. But what if they never speak to me again? Then you'll know that your value to them was purely financial. Would you really want relationships to continue under those circumstances? The question haunted me, but I was beginning to understand the answer. I would rather be alone with my dignity intact than surrounded by people who only tolerated me because of what I could provide. The turning point came in late spring, almost a year after my disastrous birthday dinner. Emma graduated from high school with honors and was accepted to several colleges. She called me with the news, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Grandma, I got into Parsons. I'm going to study art and design." My heart swelled with pride. Parsons School of Design was prestigious and expensive, but Emma had earned her place through talent and hard work. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. There's just one problem," she said, her voice becoming quieter. "It's really expensive, and Mom and Dad are saying we can't afford it. They want me to go to community college for 2 years first." Community college wasn't a bad option, but I could hear the disappointment in Emma's voice. This was her dream school, her chance to develop her artistic talents in a world-class program. "Have they talked to you about financial aid? Scholarships?" "A little. But they say it's not enough. Mom mentioned that maybe you could help, but Dad said you're being difficult about money now." There it was. After months of silence, they were using Emma as a messenger, exploiting her relationship with me to get what they wanted. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using a 17-year-old girl's college dreams as leverage in their ongoing attempt to access my finances. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Have your parents talked to you about my money before?" A pause that told me everything. "Sometimes. They said you have savings that could help the family, but you're being selfish with it." Selfish? For wanting to keep the money I'd earned through 30 years of labor. Selfish for saying no to constant requests after decades of saying yes to everything. "What do you think about that?" Another pause, longer this time. I think it's your money. You worked for it. I mean, it would be amazing if you could help with college, but I don't think you're bad if you can't." The maturity in her voice made me want to cry. At 17, Emma understood concepts of autonomy and respect that her parents had never grasped. "Sweetheart, let me think about this, okay? Don't worry about college. We'll figure something out." After we ended the call, I sat in my kitchen staring out at the spring evening. The trees were beginning to bloom, tiny green buds appearing on branches that had looked dead just weeks before. I felt like those trees, dormant for so long that everyone assumed I was finished growing, but now experiencing an unexpected season of new life. I had been planning to set up a trust fund for Emma's education anyway. The question was whether to do it quietly, maintaining the boundaries I'd established with her parents, or to use this moment as an opportunity for a larger conversation about family, respect, and love. That evening, I called Tommy directly for the first time in months. "Mom?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything okay?" The assumption that I would only call if something was wrong spoke volumes about the state of our relationship. "I'm fine. I'm calling about Emma's college situation." His voice immediately became guarded. "What about it?" "She told me she got into Parsons." "Yeah, well, it's too expensive. We've explained that to her. Have you explored all the financial aid options?" "Mom, we're not idiots." "Of course we have. The bottom line is it costs too much money. How much would you need?" I could practically hear his heart rate increase. After months of being cut off from his primary source of emergency funding, the possibility of a major windfall was clearly exciting. "Well, after scholarships and aid, we'd probably need about $20,000 a year. $80,000 over 4 years. It was a substantial sum, but not beyond my means given the growth of my investments and the money I'd saved by ending the constant drain of their requests. "I might be willing to help with that," I said carefully. "Really? Mom, that would be amazing. Emma will be so excited." There would be conditions. The silence on the other end was telling. Tommy wasn't used to me setting terms for my generosity. "What kind of conditions?" "First, the money would go directly to the school, not to you. Second, it would be for Emma's education only, not for any other family expenses. Third, Emma would know that this money is coming from me specifically, not just from the family." "Okay, that all sounds reasonable. I'm not finished." Another silence. "Fourth, this would be a one-time gift. I won't be providing ongoing financial support for your family after this. And fifth, if you or Sarah ask me for money for anything else, emergencies, bills, loans, whatever, the college funding stops immediately." "Mom, that seems kind of harsh." "It's a boundary, Tommy. Something I should have established years ago. What if there's a real emergency? Then you handle it like other adults do. You figure it out yourselves." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Tommy alternating between gratitude for the college offer and resentment about the conditions attached. But in the end, he agreed. Emma's education was too important to risk, and $80,000 was too much money to walk away from over pride. When I called Emma the next day to tell her the news, her joy was infectious. "Grandma, I can't believe it. Are you serious? I can really go to Parsons?" "You can really go to Parsons. But why? I mean, Mom and Dad said you weren't helping family anymore." Her question deserved an honest answer. "I stopped giving money to your parents because they were taking advantage of my generosity. But you're different, Emma. You've never asked me for anything except love and attention, and you've given me the same in return. This isn't charity or obligation, it's an investment in someone I believe in. What if Mom and Dad get mad about the conditions you set? Then that's something they'll have to work through. This is about your future, not their feelings." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you really okay living alone all this time? I mean, after everyone stopped talking to you?" The question revealed how much she'd been thinking about the family dynamics, how much she'd been worrying about me during the months of silence. It was hard at first, I admitted. I felt very alone. But I also discovered things about myself that I'd forgotten. I found out who I am when I'm not trying to make everyone else happy all the time. "And who are you?" The question took my breath away. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I'd asked myself? "I'm still figuring that out," I said honestly. "But I'm enjoying the process." Emma's college funding created an interesting dynamic with Tommy and Sarah. They were grateful for the money, but resentful of the conditions. They wanted my generosity without my oversight, my support without my standards. The cognitive dissonance of needing someone they considered selfish and difficult created tension that played out in awkward phone calls and stilted conversations. Sarah, in particular, seemed unable to reconcile her anger at my newfound boundaries with her relief at having Emma's college costs covered. She called me a few weeks after the arrangements were finalized, her voice carrying that familiar edge of manipulation. "Mom, I want you to know how much Emma's college money means to us." "Good. I'm glad Emma will have the education she deserves. It just seems unfair that you'd help with something so expensive but you won't help with smaller things anymore." There it was. The real purpose of the call wasn't gratitude, it was an attempt to leverage Emma's college fund into renewed access to my bank account. The college fund is a one-time investment in Emma's future. It's completely separate from the pattern of constant financial requests that I decided to stop. But what if we have a real emergency? You'll handle it like adults handle emergencies. You'll use your savings, take out loans, ask other family members, or figure out creative solutions. What you won't do is automatically turn to me as your first and only option. The call ended poorly, with Sarah hanging up in frustration. But I felt oddly peaceful afterward. For the first time in my adult life, I had given a gift with clear boundaries and stuck to those boundaries when challenged. It felt powerful and strange and absolutely right. Summer brought Emma's preparation for college and my own continued evolution. I took my first real vacation since the 1990s, spending a week in Vermont with Rose and 2 other friends from our art group. We stayed in a small bed and breakfast, painted landscapes during the day, and talked late into the evenings about books, politics, and the surprising freedom that came with age. I never expected to be happier at 70 than I was at 50, Rose said one evening as we sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. But I am. I'm finally living for myself instead of everyone else. Her words resonated deeply. I was happier at 64 than I'd been in decades. The constant anxiety about other people's problems had lifted from my shoulders. The guilt about not doing enough, not giving enough, not being enough had faded into background noise. For the first time since my children had been born, I was living my own life. The watercolor classes had evolved into a serious hobby, and then into something approaching passion. My teacher, Maria, encouraged me to submit a piece to a local art show, and to my amazement, it was accepted. The painting was of the view from my fire escape at sunset, the Manhattan skyline glowing gold behind a foreground of urban details, fire escapes, rooftop gardens, the geometric patterns of windows in apartment buildings. Standing next to my painting at the art show opening, watching strangers examine my work with interest and appreciation, I felt a pride I'd never experienced before. This was something I'd created purely for myself, something that existed because I'd wanted to make it, not because anyone needed me to produce it. Emma visited the art show with me, her arm linked through mine as we walked through the gallery. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "You're like a different person than you were a year ago." "Different how?" "Lighter. Happier. Like you're not carrying around a huge weight anymore." She was right. The weight I'd carried for decades, the responsibility for everyone else's emotional and financial well-being, had been lifted from my shoulders. What remained was lighter, more essential, my own dreams, my own joy, my own sense of purpose. Fall came with Emma's departure for college and Tommy's first real test of my boundaries. He called on a Tuesday evening in October, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, I need help. Sarah lost her job, and we're behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure." For a split second, I felt the old familiar tug of responsibility. My daughter was in trouble. My granddaughter's home was at risk. Surely this qualified as the kind of emergency that justified breaking my own rules. But then I remembered the pattern. Sarah had lost jobs before, usually because of conflicts with supervisors or attendance problems. Tommy's business had been struggling for years, largely because he made poor decisions and expected others to bail him out. This wasn't an unforeseeable disaster, it was the predictable result of poor planning and financial irresponsibility. "How much do you need?" I asked, though I'd already decided what my answer would be. $15,000 would cover the back payments and give us some breathing room. $15,000. A year ago, I would have transferred the money before the conversation ended, probably adding an extra $1,000 just in case. The old Dorothy would have emptied her savings account before letting her children lose their home. "I'm sorry, Tommy, but I can't help with that." The silence on the other end was profound. "What do you mean you can't help?" "I mean I won't help. You're both adults with decades of work experience. You have options, family loans, refinancing, selling assets, finding new jobs quickly. What you don't have is the option to make your problems into my problems." "Mom, this is serious. They could take our house. Then you'd better start making some serious decisions about how to prevent that. I can't believe you'd let us lose our home over some petty grudge about money." The accusation stung, but it also revealed how completely he misunderstood the situation. This wasn't about money, not really. It was about respect, autonomy, and the right to live my own life instead of constantly managing theirs. "This isn't a grudge, Tommy. It's a boundary. I spent decades teaching you that no matter how irresponsible you were, no matter how poorly you planned or how badly you treated me, I would always bail you out. I'm not doing that anymore. So you're just going to let us become homeless? You're not going to become homeless. You're going to figure out a solution like millions of other Americans do when they face financial difficulties. You're going to handle this crisis yourselves." The conversation ended with Tommy screaming at me, calling me selfish and heartless and a terrible mother. Each word was designed to wound, to break down my resolve, to guilt me into returning to the familiar pattern of rescue and resentment. A year earlier, those words would have devastated me. I would have transferred the money while his voice was still ringing in my ears, desperate to prove that I was a good mother who loved her children. But that night, I felt oddly calm. His anger revealed more about his character than it did about mine. 2 weeks later, Emma called with an update. "Grandma, did you hear? Dad got a second job, and Mom found work at a temp agency. They worked out a payment plan with the bank. That's good news. They're really mad at you though." "I imagine they are. Do you feel bad about not helping them?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. "I feel sad that they're struggling," I said honestly. "But I don't feel bad about not rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices. I think you did the right thing." "Why?" "Because now they know they can handle problems on their own. Before, they always had you to fall back on, so they never had to get really creative or work really hard to fix things." Once again, Emma's wisdom astounded me. At 18, she understood concepts about enabling and personal responsibility that many adults never grasped. Winter came early that year, and with it, a period of reflection on everything that had changed in my life. I still lived in the same apartment, worked at the same library, shopped at the same stores. But everything felt different because I was different. The relationships that remained in my life were healthier, more balanced. Emma called regularly now, not because she needed anything, but because she enjoyed talking to me. Our conversations ranged from her art projects to her new friends to books she was reading. Sometimes we talked for an hour about nothing in particular, just enjoying each other's company across the miles. My friendship with Rose had deepened into something like sisterhood. We took art classes together, traveled together, shared confidences and dreams with the kind of intimacy I'd never experienced with my own children. The other friends I'd made through the art group filled my social calendar with activities that nourished my soul rather than draining my energy. The library position continued to evolve, and I found myself taking on projects I would never have attempted before. I applied for and received a grant to start a literacy program for elderly immigrants, drawing on my experience with patrons like Mrs. Chen. The program was successful beyond my wildest expectations, and I was invited to speak about it at a conference for librarians in Boston. Standing behind that podium, looking out at an audience of professionals who had come to hear about my work, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with serving other people's needs. This was recognition for my own skills, my own vision, my own professional contributions. I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide. My financial situation had stabilized in ways I'd never imagined possible. Without the constant drain of family emergencies, my savings account grew steadily. My investment portfolio, carefully managed with the help of my financial advisor, had performed even better than expected. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely secure about my future. The security wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I knew now that I could take care of myself, make my own decisions, create my own happiness. The terror I'd felt about potentially losing my children's affection had proven largely unfounded. Emma loved me more than ever, and Tommy and Sarah's absence from my life had created space for relationships that actually nourished me. Spring returned with Emma's completion of her first year at Parsons. She called me on a Sunday morning in May, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Grandma, I have amazing news. One of my professors wants to recommend me for a summer internship at a design firm in Manhattan. It's paid, and I could stay with you for the summer if that's okay." The thought of having Emma in my apartment for 3 months filled me with joy. But I also felt a flicker of the old anxiety. Would her parents see this as an opportunity to re-establish their access to my resources? "I would love to have you stay here," I said. "But I want to be clear about something up front. If your parents ask you to talk to me about money while you're here, the answer is no. I won't put you in the middle of that situation. I understand, and I promise I won't do that. This is just about spending time with you and doing the internship. Then yes, absolutely. I can't wait to have you here." Emma's summer stay transformed my life in unexpected ways. Having her energy and creativity in my small apartment was like opening windows that had been closed for years. She filled the space with her art supplies, her music, her laughter, and her endless curiosity about the world. We established routines that felt like family in the best sense of the word. Sunday morning breakfasts where we read the newspaper together and debated politics. Evening walks through the neighborhood where she pointed out details I'd never noticed despite living there for decades. Late-night conversations about art, love, ambition, and the challenges of becoming an adult in an increasingly complex world. Emma also witnessed my daily life in ways that impressed her. She saw me leave for work each morning with purpose and enthusiasm. She observed my friendships with Rose and the other women from my art group, relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than obligation and neediness. She watched me pursue my painting with the kind of dedication I'd once reserved for solving other people's problems. "Grandma," she said one evening as we cleaned up after a dinner I'd cooked just for the two of us, "you're really good at living alone." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not lonely. You have friends and hobbies and work you care about. You're not sitting around waiting for other people to make you happy." Her observation was more perceptive than she realized. I had learned to create a full life on my own terms, to find joy in my own interests, to build relationships that enhanced my happiness rather than defining it. It took me a long time to figure that out, I admitted. Do you think Mom and Dad will ever figure it out? It was a question I'd been pondering for months. Tommy and Sarah were still struggling, still looking for external solutions to internal problems, still resentful that their primary safety net had declared independence. I hope so, I said honestly. But that's their journey to make. Emma's internship was going well, and she often came home with stories about the design world she was beginning to navigate. One evening, she arrived home more thoughtful than usual. Grandma, can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course. Do you ever regret having kids? The question took my breath away. What makes you ask that? Well, you seem so much happier now that you're not constantly worrying about Dad and Aunt Sarah. And they treated you pretty badly for a long time. I just wondered if you ever wished things had been different. I sat with the question for several minutes, trying to give her the honest answer she deserved. I don't regret having your father, I said finally. Because if I hadn't had him, I wouldn't have you. But I do regret some of the choices I made as a parent. Like what? I taught your father and your aunt that they were more important than I was. I showed them through my actions that their needs would always come before mine, that their comfort mattered more than my well-being. I thought I was being loving, but I was actually teaching them to be selfish. Emma nodded slowly. Is that why they got so mad when you started saying no? Partly, yes. When someone has been getting their way for decades, any pushback feels like a personal attack rather than a reasonable boundary. Do you think they'll ever understand? I don't know. Understanding would require them to examine their own behavior, and that's painful work that many people avoid. Are you okay with that? I mean, if they never change? The question went to the heart of everything I'd been struggling with for the past year and a half. Was I prepared to live with the consequences of my newly discovered self-respect? Yes, I said, and realized I meant it completely. I spent too many years being miserable because I couldn't control how they treated me. I won't spend my remaining years being miserable because I can't control whether they grow and change. Emma hugged me then, a fierce embrace that conveyed understanding beyond her years. Summer ended with Emma's return to school and my own return to the quieter rhythms of living alone. But the apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a sanctuary I'd created for myself, a space that reflected my own tastes and interests rather than a way station where I waited to be useful to other people. The fall brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Chen from across the hall knocked on my door one evening, carrying a plate of homemade dumplings and wearing an expression of concern. Dorothy, she said in her carefully constructed English, you okay? No family visit long time. Her question was gentle but pointed. She'd noticed the absence of Tommy and Sarah's occasional visits, the lack of familiar voices in the hallway. I are fine, Mrs. Chen. Just some changes in my family situation. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes family complicated. But you look good. Happy. I am happy. Good. Happy important. She handed me the plate of dumplings. You good neighbor. Good person. Family lucky have you. Her words, simple and sincere, meant more to me than any expensive gift ever had. Here was a woman who barely knew me, offering kindness without expecting anything in return. It struck me that Mrs. Chen understood family better than my own children did. October brought my 65th birthday, a milestone I'd been dreading. The previous year's birthday disaster had left me with no expectations and considerable anxiety about getting older in isolation. But Emma surprised me by taking the train from the city to spend the weekend with me. She arrived Friday evening carrying a small canvas and a set of watercolor paints. I thought we could paint together, she said. Maybe something we could both keep to remember the weekend. We set up a still life on my kitchen table, a vase with autumn leaves from the courtyard, a bowl of apples, morning light streaming through clean windows. Working side by side, occasionally commenting on color choices or brush techniques, felt like a kind of meditation. This is the best birthday I've had in years, I told Emma as we cleaned our brushes. Really? Really? I'm doing something I love with someone who loves me. What more could I want? Emma's painting was technically superior to mine, she had training in natural talent that I lacked. But mine captured something harder to define: contentment, peace, the satisfaction of a life finally lived on my own terms. That evening, we cooked dinner together and talked about her classes, her friends, her plans for the future. She wanted to start her own design firm eventually, creating beautiful spaces that reflected her clients' authentic selves. That sounds like what you've done with your apartment, she observed. It used to feel like a place where you waited for life to happen. Now it feels like a place where you live your life. Her insight was perfect. I had transformed my space, and in doing so, I'd transformed myself. Sunday morning brought an unexpected phone call. Sarah's voice was smaller than usual, less confident than the demanding tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Mom, I wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday. Thank you, Sarah. Emma told me she was spending the weekend with you. Yes, she's here. A pause. How are you doing? The question seemed genuine rather than perfunctory, which surprised me. I'm doing well. How are you? We're managing. Tommy's second job is working out, and my temp agency placed me in a permanent position. Things are stabilizing. I'm glad to hear that. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, I know things have been difficult between us. Yes, they have been. I've been thinking about what you said, about the calls only coming when we needed something. You were right about that. The admission hung in the air between us. I waited for her to continue. I don't know how to fix it, she said finally. We've gotten into such a bad pattern, and I don't know how to get back to just talking to each other. Her words carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard from her in years. This wasn't manipulation or an attempt to re-establish access to my finances. This was her trying, however awkwardly, to acknowledge the damage that had been done to our relationship. We could start with conversations that aren't about problems or needs, I said gently. We could talk about books, or weather, or what we're cooking for dinner. We could remember how to be people to each other instead of just problem solver and problem creator. I'd like that. So would I. The conversation was brief, and I didn't have any illusions that one phone call would repair decades of dysfunction. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had built up between us. Emma overheard the call and asked about it afterward. Do you think she really wants to change? I think she wants to want to change, I said. Whether she's capable of actually doing the work is something we'll find out over time. Are you willing to try again? I'm willing to see what happens if she approaches me differently. But I won't go back to the old patterns, Emma. I can't. Good. You deserve better than that. The wisdom in her young voice continued to amaze me. She understood boundaries and respect in ways her parents never had. Winter settled over Queens with its familiar rhythm of bitter cold and early darkness. But I felt warmer and more alive than I had in years. My days were full of purpose, work at the library, art classes, friendships that nourished my soul, small adventures that brought me joy. I started taking weekend trips, something I'd never done for myself before. A Saturday in Philadelphia to visit museums. A Sunday drive to the Jersey Shore in winter, watching storms roll in over empty beaches. Weekend getaways with Rose and our art group to sketch in different environments. Each small adventure reinforced my sense of independence and capability. I could navigate new places, handle unexpected challenges, create memories that belonged entirely to me. The woman who had once felt helpless without her family's constant needs to define her purpose was discovering her own strength. The holiday season approached with less dread than I'd felt in years. Emma would be coming home for winter break, and we'd made plans to celebrate Christmas together. Tommy and Sarah remained at a distance, which was fine with me. The absence of obligatory gift exchanges and forced family gatherings left space for genuine celebration. Christmas morning was quiet and perfect. Emma and I opened small, thoughtful presents, cooked breakfast together, and spent the afternoon working on a collaborative painting, a winter scene from the courtyard outside my window. The day felt sacred in its simplicity, unmarked by the tensions and disappointments that had characterized family gatherings for so many years. Grandma, Emma said as we cleaned up after dinner, thank you for showing me what it looks like to live life on your own terms. What do you mean? I mean, watching you change has taught me that I don't have to make myself small to make other people comfortable. I don't have to give everything away to prove that I'm worth loving. Her words brought tears to my eyes. If my journey toward self-respect had taught Emma those lessons, then every difficult moment had been worth it. As winter turned to spring, Sarah began calling more regularly. The conversations were tentative at first, awkward attempts to rebuild a relationship that had been transactional for so long we'd forgotten how to simply enjoy each other's company. But gradually, we found our rhythm. She told me about her new job, her struggles with her marriage, her worries about Emma's education and future. I listened without rushing to solve her problems, and she talked without asking me to fix anything. It felt revolutionary. I never realized how much pressure I was putting on you, she said during one of our calls. Always calling with crises, always expecting you to have answers and solutions and money. I made it easy for you to do that, I admitted. I trained you to see me as the family ATM instead of just your mother. Why did you do that? The question deserved an honest answer. Because I was afraid that if I wasn't useful, I wouldn't be loved. I thought my value to you was based on what I could provide rather than who I was. That must have been lonely. It was. But it was also my choice. I'm making different choices now. I can see that. You sound different on the phone. Stronger. I feel stronger. Our relationship was far from perfect, but it was more honest than it had been in decades. Sarah still struggled with boundaries. She occasionally slipped into old patterns of presenting problems as if I were responsible for solving them. But when I gently redirected these conversations, she usually caught herself and adjusted course. Tommy remained more distant, still resentful of the financial boundaries I'd established. Our interactions were cordial but superficial, lacking the warmth that was slowly returning to my relationship with Sarah. I made peace with the possibility that our relationship might never recover fully. His inability to see me as anything other than a source of support was his loss more than mine. Spring brought my second year of serious painting, and with it, a level of skill and confidence I'd never expected to achieve. Maria, my teacher, encouraged me to consider entering a juried show in Manhattan, a significant step up from the small community exhibitions I'd participated in previously. The thought of submitting my work for evaluation terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. But at 65, I was learning that growth required discomfort, that the most rewarding experiences often lay just beyond the edge of my comfort zone. I chose a painting I'd completed over the winter, a view from the roof of my building, looking across Queens toward Manhattan at sunset. The piece captured the urban beauty I'd learned to see after decades of considering my neighborhood merely functional. It represented my own journey from seeing my life as merely functional toward recognizing its beauty and value. The notification came on a Tuesday morning in April. My painting had been accepted into the show. I called Emma immediately, my voice shaking with excitement. "Grandma, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I can barely believe it myself. You have to let me know when the opening is. I would miss it for anything." The gallery opening was scheduled for the first Friday in May. Emma took the train in from school, and Rose and several friends from my art group planned to attend. Even Sarah asked if she could come, a request that surprised and touched me. Standing in the gallery that evening, watching strangers examine my painting with interest and appreciation, I felt a kind of pride I'd never experienced before. This was mine, my vision, my work, my accomplishment. No one needed me to create it. I'd painted it purely because I wanted to, because it brought me joy, because I had something to say about light and color and the beauty hidden in ordinary urban scenes. Emma stood next to me, radiant with pride, introducing me to her friends as my grandmother, the artist. The phrase made me smile every time she said it. I was someone's grandmother, yes, but I was also an artist, a librarian, a friend, a woman who had learned to value herself. Sarah arrived halfway through the evening, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sophisticated gallery environment. She found me standing next to my painting, listening to a stranger discuss the way I'd captured the light. "Mom," she said quietly, "this is beautiful. Thank you. I had no idea you were this good." "Neither did I." She studied the painting for several minutes. "It makes our neighborhood look almost glamorous." "It is glamorous, in its own way. I just learned how to see it differently." We stood together in comfortable silence, looking at the painting that represented so much more than pigment on canvas. It was proof of my capacity for growth, evidence of talents I'd buried under decades of service to other people, a declaration that my life belonged to me. The evening was everything I could have hoped for and more. Surrounded by people who celebrated my achievements without expecting anything in return, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life finally lived authentically. As spring turned to summer, Emma returned for another internship, this time with a more prestigious firm. Our second summer together was even richer than the first. We'd established patterns of mutual respect and genuine affection that made every day together a gift. Emma had grown during her sophomore year, becoming more confident in her artistic vision and more thoughtful about her relationships. She observed the changes in our family dynamics with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both the dysfunction and the healing. "You know what's different about you now?" she asked one evening as we walked through Flushing Meadows Corona Park. "What? You're not trying to make everyone else happy all the time. You care about other people, but you don't sacrifice yourself for them anymore. Is that good or bad?" "It's good. Really good. It makes you more fun to be around, actually, because you're genuinely happy instead of just pretending to be fine while you're falling apart inside." Her observation was more perceptive than she knew. I was genuinely happy for the first time in decades, not because my circumstances were perfect, but because I'd learned to create happiness from within rather than depending on other people to provide it. August brought an unexpected development. Tommy called, his voice carrying none of the resentment I'd grown accustomed to hearing. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something." "Okay. I've been going to therapy." The admission surprised me. Tommy had always been skeptical of mental health treatment, dismissive of anything that suggested his problems might be internal rather than circumstantial. "That's good, Tommy. The therapist has been helping me understand some things about our family dynamics. About how I treated you." I waited for him to continue. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not just saying sorry to get back on your good side." "I'm listening." "I used you, Mom. For years, I used you. I treated you like you existed to solve my problems and fund my mistakes. I never thought about what that cost you, what it felt like to always be the giver and never the receiver. His words carried a weight of genuine understanding that I'd never heard from him before. I can't undo all the ways I took advantage of your generosity, he continued. But I want you to know that I see it now. I understand why you had to set boundaries with us. Thank you for saying that. Would you be willing to try to rebuild our relationship? Not the old way, where I was always asking for things, but a real relationship between adults who care about each other. The question hung between us, heavy with possibility and risk. Tommy had hurt me deeply, exploited my love in ways that had nearly broken my spirit. But he was also my child, and the vulnerability in his voice suggested genuine change rather than manipulation. I'd be willing to try, I said carefully. But it would have to be different, Tommy. I won't go back to being your solution to every problem. I understand that. I want it to be different too. The conversation was a beginning rather than a resolution. Rebuilding our relationship would take time, patience, and continued effort from both of us. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful that my son might learn to see me as a person rather than a resource. Emma witnessed this conversation and its aftermath with the keen interest of someone who had lived through both the dysfunction and the tentative healing. Do you believe he's really changed? She asked. I believe he wants to change. Whether he can sustain that intention over time is something we'll discover together. Are you scared of getting hurt again? A little. But I'm not as vulnerable as I used to be. I have a full life now, relationships that nourish me, interests that bring me joy. Tommy's presence or absence can't determine my happiness anymore. That's really healthy, Grandma. It's taken me a long time to get here. As Emma's second summer with me drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had changed since that devastating birthday dinner 2 years earlier. The woman who had collapsed in her kitchen, dropping a ceramic cup while her children conspired to control her finances, felt like a different person entirely. I had learned to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, to value my own needs as highly as everyone else's. I had discovered talents I didn't know I possessed, formed friendships based on mutual respect rather than need, created a life that belonged entirely to me. The relationships that remained in my life were healthier, more balanced. Emma's love for me had deepened as she witnessed my transformation. Sarah's renewed efforts to connect authentically had led to genuine conversations rather than transactional exchanges. Even Tommy's tentative steps toward genuine change offered hope for eventual reconciliation. Most importantly, I had learned to be alone without being lonely. My apartment had become a sanctuary rather than a way station, my solitude a choice rather than an abandonment. I woke each morning with purpose and went to bed each night with satisfaction, no longer waiting for other people to give meaning to my existence. Fall arrived with Emma's return to school and my own return to the rhythms of independent living. But autumn felt different this year, hopeful rather than melancholy, rich with possibility rather than heavy with regret. I was planning my next painting, a larger canvas that would challenge my growing skills. Rose and I had discussed a winter trip to New Mexico, where we could paint desert landscapes and experience environments completely different from our urban neighborhood. The library had offered me the opportunity to lead a workshop for other librarians interested in community outreach programming. Each of these plans represented choices I was making for myself, adventures I was creating from my own desires rather than obligations I was fulfilling for other people. At 65, I was finally living the life I'd always wanted but never dared to claim. On a crisp October evening, as I prepared dinner for one and looked forward to spending the evening reading a book I'd chosen purely for pleasure, I realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the dramatic highs of getting what I wanted from other people, but the steady satisfaction of living authentically, of honoring my own needs and desires as worthy of consideration. My phone rang as I was setting the table. Emma's voice, warm and familiar, filled my small kitchen. Hi Grandma. I was just thinking about you and wanted to hear your voice. I'm so glad you called. How was your day? We talked for 20 minutes about nothing particularly important, her classes, my work, a book we were both reading, plans for her Thanksgiving visit. The conversation was a gift, valuable precisely because it served no purpose other than connection and love. After we hung up, I sat at my small table eating the meal I'd prepared for myself, looking out at the lights of Manhattan in the distance. The city sparkled with promise, millions of people living their own lives, pursuing their own dreams, creating their own versions of happiness. I raised my glass of wine in a silent toast, to Emma, whose love had sustained me through the darkest moments, to Rose and my other friends, who had shown me what healthy relationships looked like, to Sarah and Tommy, who were finally learning to see me as more than a source of support, and most importantly, to myself, for having the courage to demand better and the persistence to create it. The past no longer haunted me with regret or resentment. Those years of sacrifice and servitude had been necessary steps in a journey that led me to this moment, content, independent, valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through service to others had learned to be of service to herself first, and paradoxically, that had made her a better grandmother, friend, and person. At 65, I was finally free. Free from the exhausting cycle of giving until it hurt and then giving more. Free from the desperate need for approval that had driven me to accept scraps of affection as if they were full meals. Free from the fear that being alone meant being unloved. I was free to paint sunsets and take vacations and say no when saying yes would diminish me. I was free to choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than need, to give generously from abundance rather than desperately from emptiness. I was free to be Dorothy, not just mom or grandma or the woman who would always help in a crisis, but a complete person with her own dreams, desires, and dignity. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of crushing loneliness, nights when I questioned whether independence was worth the price of temporary isolation. There had been times when the old patterns seemed easier, when rescuing others from their problems felt more familiar than building my own life. But every difficult moment had led me closer to this evening, this contentment, this sense of wholeness that no amount of money given or crises solved had ever provided. I had learned that love without respect was ultimately hollow, that generosity without boundaries was ultimately destructive, and that a life lived entirely for others was ultimately no life at all. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked in the mirror that had once reflected despair and saw instead a woman who had fought for her own soul and won. My hair was grayer, my face more lined, but my eyes held a light that had been missing for decades. I looked like a woman who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept anything less than the respect she deserved. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, art classes and friendships, work that mattered and solitude that nourished rather than depleted. There might be phone calls from family members who were learning to relate to me as a person rather than a resource. There might be invitations to galleries or dinners with friends who valued my company rather than my wallet. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would meet it as myself, not as the woman I thought others wanted me to be, but as the woman I had fought to become. Strong enough to be alone and generous enough to love, but never again willing to sacrifice my own well-being for the comfort of people who couldn't be bothered to value what I was giving. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken 2 years of difficult choices, painful conversations, and the gradual accumulation of small acts of self-respect. But it had happened, and it was irreversible. I had tasted freedom and would never again willingly return to captivity, no matter how familiar or how justified by the vocabulary of family obligation. Life had taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are fought within, between the person we've always been and the person we have the potential to become. Breaking free requires immense courage, the kind that comes from saying no when your soul demands it, from choosing dignity over the illusion of peace, from insisting on love that lifts you up rather than love that wears you down. Have you ever lived, or known someone who lived, something like this? Have you ever found yourself giving and giving until there was nothing left, accepting treatment that diminished your spirit in the name of family harmony? Please share your story in the comments. If my journey toward self-respect has touched you even a little, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep opening my heart, keep sharing these truths that are sometimes painful but ultimately liberating. Because sometimes, the most difficult truths are the ones that set us free, and freedom, real freedom, is worth every sacrifice it requires.